So today I'm going to answer a question, or at least attempt to answer a question, which has been seemingly bugging quite a few of you for a while, which is why, Alex, do you keep using the treble 4-inch? And why weren't these ships, these battle cruisers, fitted with bigger guns earlier on for their secondaries? Well, let me show you what I call my testbed battle cruiser. And if it looks sort of like a courageous class, then you wouldn't be too disappointed. It's a little bit overweight. It's full weight. I am never quite sure why it's quite so heavy forward. I have tried moving various things around to try and reduce it. It always seems to be forward heavy, and I'm not sure why, because I put most of the components out back to the stern. So, and the armor, again, if you consider it, it's actually heavier at the back than it is forward. The aft belt is 6-inch, the main belt is 12-inch, and the fore belt's 4-inch. The main deck is 4-inch, the foredeck is 3-inch. The aft deck is 3.5-inch. It just, I have no idea. But that is it. And as you can see, it has a range of weaponry. It has 6-inch guns. In fact, it has 4 treble 6-inch guns. And it has 6 treble 4-inch guns. So, why does it carry such a range of weaponry? Well, to be honest, I call this my, if I'm getting trouble into the Baltic, this is what I want to be in ship. The 15-inch guns are excellent for me to deal with heavy cruisers, even up to other battle cruisers. Yes, there aren't a lot of them, but there's 6 of them. And yes, I could put an all-forward armament in place, but that would make this even more four-weight heavy, and that's just being problematic. But this is going into the Baltic, remember. So this is a Baltic battle cruiser, in which case I don't have the same room for maneuver as I do in the North Sea or the North Atlantic, or I would in the Pacific. So therefore, an all-forward gun armament, probably not the most sensible thing to go with. So that means I have to think of it this way. It's got the 4-inch guns to deal with motor torpedo boats and destroyers, because those are lightly armored vessels, which are going to require me to fire a lot of shells very quickly in order to hopefully take them out. It's got the 6-inch guns to deal with cruisers, and it's got the 15-inch guns to deal with anything bigger. It also has torpedoes. Just because. Honestly, just because. And let's launch and see what happens. Now, the enemy is going to have heavy cruisers, they're going to have light cruisers, and they're going to have destroyers. And this is not going to be the world's longest video, because it's mostly, and I'm probably not even going to let you watch the entirety of the battle. Mainly because this isn't my favourite of my ship designs, but it is the best for showing off the reasons you make the choices you do in guns. And that's why I built it, to test the guns. And that's what I use it for, to test the guns on this game. Because you have to understand, before you can start really designing and building ships on a game like Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, you need to test out the guns and you need to test out the ships. So doing some designs which are designed to test ships and guns is quite a good thing. As you can see, this has got 3 battle cruisers, 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 4 destroyers. So basically, it's an appropriate force, I feel, for this operation. I'm going to put the AI on, and you're going to see. This is also why I don't like them being too forward heavy, because of the way that's flying at the moment. And if you've watched other videos, which I do, normally they are not quite so. But these should be fine. Minotaur class battlecruisers. They carry their 50,000 tons displacement, 33 knots top speed. They are gorgeous. And as said, they carry 15-inch, 6-inch, and 4-inch guns. Now, the Royal Navy didn't actually fit anything above a 4-inch gun to a battle cruiser as its secondary weapon until you got to the Admiral class, which were fitted with 5.5s. And then it's only the G3s after that which are going to have the 6-inch guns. The rest have always were fitted with 4-inch guns. And that's not an unusual choice if you consider the battleships also had 4-inch guns. The battleships being, well, HMS Dreadnought had 3-inch or 12-pounder guns, 76mm in new money. And the purpose of these secondary guns was very different than they had been on the pre-Dreadnoughts. On the pre-Dreadnoughts, well, your long-range guns had been about firing to incapacitate your enemy, and your secondaries were about firing to sink your enemy. They had to have enough punch to pierce their armor at closer range, and then they would pummel them to pieces. That was the purpose of your secondary guns on a pre-Dreadnought. Your secondary guns on a Dreadnought, though, are not for that role. You carry enough main guns to do that job. You carry enough main guns that you will be able to do that job with them alone. So your secondary guns become about what is the likely threat you're going to have to deal with while you're trying to pummel your opponent to pieces. And the likely threat that the Royal Navy and most navies worked out they were going to have to deal with while trying to pummel their enemy to pieces with their primary armament was destroyers. Torpedo boat destroyers and torpedo boats and all sorts of maybe even some light cruisers of a variety. As such, this was their purpose. Now, they got very close in very quickly. This is definitely a Barents Sea engagement, as you can see, very close, straight on the money, very quickly. It's not exactly good for the Germans actually being so close this early on in the fight, because they're getting a lot of damaged ships, which are probably going to slow them down as the fight goes on. I don't think that destroyer is long for this world. It's in 4-inch gun range. That means it's got a lot of 4-inch gunfire coming in on it. Ouch. Well, good luck, little destroyer. That was rather pointless me saying good luck. You're just about to sink. That's just, sunking. That's what you carry the triple 4-inch for. When you're dealing with threats which pack a massive outsized punch, i.e. a torpedo, but rely on speed and maneuverability to deliver that weapon, they are not going to hang around for you to get that single 6-inch shell or even that 15-inch shell to hit them. And you're probably not going to be engaging them and seeing them at ranges far enough away to do so, because they're far smaller than you and they're going to hide between the waves, especially if the wave range is large enough. So that's where the treble 4-inch gun comes in. That basically puts enough shells downrange that will do enough damage that even a few hits will basically take out an enemy destroyer. Treble 4-inch guns are really, really not a good friend to any destroyer. Any battlecruiser mounting them is going to make very quick work of anything which is unarmored. And that is their purpose. The trouble is with treble 4 inches, it's not really good, and this wasn't its main problem, to be upgraded to a dual purpose. That's why they go with twin guns in the end for that role, because once you are trying to look at something which is supposed to be dual purpose and engage aircraft and track after aircraft and at the angles which you have to engage aircraft in, as well as track and engage ships, you then find you want to go for a dual mount, which is what leads you to the 4.7-inch and, of course, the 5.5-inch and the 5.25-inch. All these guns are lovely and they're able to be made dual purpose. They are at the point at which they are fast enough firing that you can get enough shells downrange. You should be able to hit a enemy ship with enough firepower to stop it, but they are easy enough to maintain and maneuver. You can use them for anti-aircraft work as well. 6-inch guns. 6-inch guns on a battlecruiser, they're for engaging cruisers. And if you're the battlecruiser, which thinks you're going to be in a fight where you're engaging both battlecruisers and enemy cruisers, you think you're going to be fighting the battlecruiser equivalent of a fleet action. This is the point, and as I pointed out earlier, the battleships in the Royal Navy, they don't carry 6-inch guns until you get to the Iron Dukes. The Bellerophons introduce 4-inch guns, and from that point on until you get to the Iron Dukes, it's 4-inch, 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 4-inch. And again, because they're presuming that their secondary armaments focus is going to be deal with enemy destroyers, deal with enemy torpedo boats. Anything bigger than that, the primary armament is supposed to deal with if it's getting within firing range. And that is actually what they did. Even the Germans, if we're talking about the first cruiser squadron at the Battle of Jutland, the reason they get pummeled like they do is because of a Arbuthnot's dash across in front of the battlecruiser squadron, or the battlecruiser force, and straight between the Grand Fleet and the High Seas Fleet. So, blocking the Grand Fleet with his own smoke and their own fire, but also making himself the center of attention. So he gets pummeled by the primary guns of the German High Seas Fleet. Not really a smart maneuver. You don't always make smart maneuvers when you're an admiral. You can't always make them. Sometimes you think you're making a right maneuver and you think you're not. Let's be honest, Arbuthnot, as we'll be getting more discussion of next week, was living with the legacy of Trowbridge and the fact that he had made the smart maneuver and then he got his career canned. And that's the thing. If you've seen that happen to someone who is equivalently good, well, then you're going to think you have to make the aggressive maneuver. But life happens. So, as we can see, the 4-inch guns are doing their job. They are massacring enemy destroyer forces before they get in range of being actually able to deliver that very powerful and very scary weapon that could cause me a lot of trouble. Lord Clyde is running along the stern and appears to be on fire, but otherwise not too bothered. Hasn't seemed to fire any torpedoes. Crews at 99%, stations are running at 97%, so they're unaffected, and yeah. Pretty much the enemy cruiser force, which is proving problematic, but my ships are quickly taking out the German destroyers. Now, again, is the AI doing the smart decision here? Yes, the AI is doing the smart decision because the destroyers are the things which can cause the most damage if you lose track on them. So getting rid of them quickly while you're outpacing and outmaneuvering the cruisers makes sense. Also, there's the fact that these destroyers can't really catch them, but their torpedoes could. And that's just not fair, really. I feel sorry for this poor destroyer, really, I do. There's just so much 4-inch fire coming on here. You don't want to hang out in 4-inch range of anything with treble 4-inch guns. And if we go to the edge of the circle, you can see if I get to the edge of the circle, he says, what the gun ranges are. Bye-bye, destroyer. And still within 6-inch range and 15-inch range, of course, of the cruisers. Ah, there they are. Minotaur, Glorious, and Lord Clyde. Probably not the smartest position for this particular light cruiser to find itself in, but it has got, well, cruiser to find itself in, it has got 9 10-inch guns, so it's feeling pretty tough and pretty strong. I can't, be upset with that. Well, I'd say it's got 9 10-inch guns. So I've got 9, might have 3 and 6 7-inch guns, and they're sometimes a little weird. We'll leave that to one side. Well, those could be the 7-inch guns. That's just a complicated gun arrangement. But either way, this Deutschland class, improved Deutschland class, is currently getting hammered by these battle cruisers. And that's the real point in the end of the battle cruisers. It is to hammer away at opponents. It is to go and do the reconnaissance. It is to be able to do the work that needs to be done when it needs to be done. And that's going to be reflected in their armament. So they have the 4-inch gun, because the 4-inch gun makes sense. They have the 4-inch gun because that will destroy the destroyers and the torpedo boats and all the things smaller than the destroyers. You fit 6-inch guns if you think you're going to be dealing with something bigger. So ultimately, the secondary armament on a ship is the best indicator you have of the type of battles which the nation building those ships think they're going to fight. If it's a heavy secondary armament, if it's let's say it's a battleship, which is normally carrying 16-inch guns, but it has 8-inch secondaries or something like that, it suggests they expect their battles are going to be against mainly a battleship enemy with heavy cruisers in support. If it's a battleship which has 15-inch guns, mainly 4-inch secondary battery, well, they expect their opponents to be mainly fighting either cruisers, in which case they're going to be using their 15-inch guns for them, or if they're fighting other capital units, other battleships, they expect their the other threat to be that will be present that they'll have to think about will be destroyers. And the variations in between those guns and the variations in between it tells you about the threat. Are they carrying single 4-inch guns? In which case, they are probably expecting multiple angles of attacks and large numbers of vessels. If they're carrying multi-barreled mounts, that suggests they're expecting the enemy to concentrate and to come at them from certain angles and to have to put down a lot of covering fire, basically a blanket of fire, to protect those angles. Now, there's also the fact that multi-barrel does tend to provide greater likelihood of hitting a target, but you can also be 3 times as wrong as well as 3 times as right. So these things are fors and against, pluses and minuses. Now, usually at this point, someone brings up to me and goes, or either mentions the Nelson class or the G3s and goes, well, they have their 6-inch positioned here. They have their main guns positioned here. How does that make sense? When you're designing your fore and aft, your ship, your all forward gun ships, why aren't you putting in 6-inch? Well, again, it's because of the threat I think they're likely to face if I would go design for battle. If I'm designing them to apply during the renown period, as I often have been with some of the all forward gun ships I've shown you in the past and in the past video using UAD, I am looking at a period where the major threat, if we have the forward guns, is destroyers. That's the major threat the British are thinking about in terms of their capital ships. The major threat they're obsessed with are torpedoes. Torpedoes come from destroyers. The best gun for dealing with the destroyers, the 4-inch gun. The best method? A multi-barreled, and as many of those mounts as you can carry. When you're dealing with torpedo boats, singles, fine. When you're dealing with destroyers, which are bigger, you need to hit them with more shells. There are also going to likely be fewer of those, and you're probably going to be in a fleet action where you've got lots of ships. So it's going to be a smaller ratio of destroyers to you. This all means that you carry your guns differently. You go for a multi-barrel mount. But once you start going up and going, well, I think the enemy destroyers we're going to be facing are not going to be 500 tons. They're more likely going to be 1,500 tons. Well, then a 6-inch gun starts to look quite attractive. When you start thinking you're going to be dealing with probably light cruisers of an order of 4,000 to 5,000 tons, again, a 6-inch gun looks quite attractive. Because anything bigger than that, you can probably focus your main armament on and not be too worried about dealing with. The odds are anything bigger than that's your major threat anyway, and you'll be focusing your main armament on it. But if you're focusing your main guns on a light cruiser force, that ain't fun for the light cruisers. I've done those drills. It's not fun. And it's not fun for the light cruisers especially. But again, it comes back to the old discussion and the point I always return to when I'm talking about ship design. What do you want it to do? If you want your ship to go in and you are focused on purely on it fighting other battleships, then secondary guns, why bother them? They're a waste of weight, a waste of tonnage. If, however, you think it's not going to be able to focus purely on secondary fighting battleships, that you think your destroyers as good as they are, your cruisers as good as they are, some enemy destroyers are going to get through, then you concentrate on it. And then you put some secondary weapons in. But do you think the enemy cruisers are going to get through? Well, there are fewer of them, and your cruisers are going to be doing just as hard work as the enemies are to stop them as the enemies are doing to get in. So, do you need to have a counter cruiser weapon for a battleship if it's operating in a battle fleet? Or can you rely on your primary guns? Which is why it tends to come down to the ships which turn into gun farms. They just festooned with weapons. Everywhere looks like they've planted something extra. And people then go, well, what threat are these people designing? Is this Navy designing for? Ultimately, that Navy is probably designing it for that ship to be out on its own. And this is ultimately what leads to the German problems in World War II with their ship designs and the overcomplicated nature and the inefficient nature of the Bismarck and the Tirpitz designs. The reason they have the range of weapons they do is because of the range of threats those ships are likely to face, because they are likely to be on their own. A battleship surface raider is likely to be on its own. And that means that when the Royal Navy, which was the feared one, but also the French Navy, which were likely to chuck everything they could at them, and I mean everything. If there was a kitchen sink free and not being used, there would be an inquiry, a formal board of discussion, and everything else put in the process. But how do you defend against that? Well, you either have to have dual-purpose guns, which are going to have to make you choose which threat you should focus on and carry a lot of them. Because you're going to have to say to the gun, oh, you're going to have to focus in on that one, and that one's going to have to focus on that one. You're actually going to have to make decisions. Or you carry a smaller number in individual quantity of specialist guns. So there, oh yes, you're designed as you will be the anti-cruiser guns. You will be the anti-destroyer guns. You'll be the anti-aircraft guns. You'll be the anti-primary threat guns. We are happy with you. We have defined everything and have worked out what these guns will do. Which is where the G3s are rather interesting. And the Nelsons. And the N3s. Because they, of course, have these 6-inch guns. And 4.7-inch AA guns. Now, 4.7-inch becomes the basis of the general purpose armament of many interwar Royal Navy destroyers. For good or for ill. 6-inch? Well, that becomes the most common cruiser armament. But once you start thinking it's going to have triple 16-inch guns, it's going to, well, basically it's going to be carrying 9 16-inch guns, 12 6-inch guns, 6 4.7-inch guns, and 40 40mm guns, because it's going to have 4 10-barrel 2-pounder mountings. Which, by the way, if they had been fitted and it had gone into service, would have been so cool. Plus 2 24.5-inch torpedo tubes. What you need to make the day happy. Have massive torpedoes. They sound pretty all-round armed, don't they? They sound like the Royal Navy is doing what the German Navy did in World War II. Until you start to think through those guns. The 4.7-inch mount, 6 single mounts, yes, but each one has quite a range of motion and can be also used for anti-motor torpedo boats. So it's sort of kind of the anti-light forces weapon. It can deal with aircraft and it can deal with motor torpedo boats. The 6-inch guns, well, light cruisers and destroyers, certainly. To an extent, even AA, but limited. And the triple 16-inch, anything bigger. It works. It's still 3 types of gun, and still 3 loads of ammunition. Plus, of course, this is not including the definitely AA 2-pounders, but we'll leave that to one side. I'm just happy that there are 4 dectuple mounts planned. But it's also why people start to think of things like the G3 as being, rather than a battlecruiser, being a fast battleship. I can understand their perspective. With 12 to 14 inches of belt armor and 3 to 8 inches of deck armor and all those guns, it does sound very battleshipish. But also, they're forgetting to an extent what it's being made for. The G3 is not being built to fight as part of a battlecruiser force in the North Sea. In 1918, that isn't likely. 1990, it's definitely not likely. In 1920, it's certainly not likely. Why? Because the only threat in the North Sea is the German Navy, and that's been taken out. At this point, the fascisti have not come into power in Italy, so we don't have Mussolini to worry about, and we don't have Italy to worry about in the Mediterranean. So, what is the Royal Navy building this battlecruiser for? Who's it being built to fight? Well, the clue is in its weaponry. It's got 6-inch guns. Now, you can point out that 4-inch is good enough for anti-destroyer work. It is. And honestly, they could have carried a lot of 4-inch guns. But a 6-inch gun is actually considered a very super weapon for commerce raiding. And if you're building a vessel which has a top speed of 32 knots and the ability to do 7,000 nautical miles at 16 knots, well, this sounds like a vessel which is being designed already with a potential war in the Far East in mind. Again, it's going to be a different operation than what you're dealing with. They're not thinking about having fleets. Maybe one or two of these ships together, rolling around, doing their anti-commerce raider, or perhaps doing commerce raider work themselves. Either way, those 6-inch guns are going to be useful for that. There are times I indulge myself in a variance of engineering, which is often linked with forensic archaeology. And it's sometimes referred to by some of my sister's colleagues as forensic structural analysis. I.e., when you look at the decisions that were made on the design, what does that tell you versus what is written down? Because sometimes what is written in the text in the papers that we would draw from to automatically think about and presume that this must be the reason for this design don't tell you all you need to know. Or rather, what they tell you is they tell you a snapshot of what documents have survived and what people's records have wanted to survive, and that's what people wanted to survive and wanted to write down, tells you. But when you go and look at the design, that can tell you a lot of things. What were the choices made? Why does this suddenly have 6-inch guns? Why does the Admiral class have 5.5-inch guns? Why, when everything else prior to that has had a 4-inch gun, why suddenly? Have the destroyers suddenly jumped up in size and suddenly the size of small cruisers? No, they haven't. They're getting bigger, but they're not massive at this point. So why? The questions come down to what do you use a 6-inch gun for? What do you use a 4.7-inch gun for? Even if it's classified as an A amount, what do you use a 16-inch gun for? And why are you fitting the numbers you're fitting? Once you work that out, that tends to give you a clue as to what that ship's being built for. So I hope you found today useful, and have fun.